Hi and welcome. This week I get to play with a new Eco Resin. I love to use Aqua Cast and now I'm going to try some Aqua Cast Turbo. I ordered this from the Eli-Chem website and it says that it's a rapid setting, eco-friendly, polymer enhanced casting and moulding material with a faster setting than our standard Aqua Cast. As I understand it, this sets within 15 minutes. You still only need water. I'm going to use this oval candle dish. I think I got this from Temu. You don't have to use it for candles, it's just a lovely dish on its own. I filled it with water to find out how many millilitres of water it had, which was 200, and that equates to 200 grams. If you know how many grams your moulds take, you know how many millilitres, and you'll be able to work out your resin. So obviously if you're using 1:1, that would be 100 mils each. But in order to find out my Aqua Cast and my Turbo, I used the calculator which is provided on Eli-Chem's website. And once I worked out what those ratios would be, I just use a Sharpie pen to write on the inside of my mould. And I've written down the Turbo and the Aqua Cast because they both use slightly different ratios. So let me show you how I found out what needs to be used, how much powder and how much water. Right, so I've gone to the Eli-Chem website, elichem.co.uk, and I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. Now this central banner, you should be able to find the Aqua Cast, and if you click on that banner it will take you to the water-based Eco Resins. And you should see a listing for Turbo, and if you scroll down the page you find the Eco Resin material calculator. There's a drop down menu which is currently set to Aqua Cast. I'm putting in 200 grams in the top and it will tell me exactly how much powder I need and how much water. If you click the drop down you can select Aqua Cast Turbo and it changes the ratio for you. And that's how I got the numbers to write down on the inside of my mould. So I've got 257 powder and 103 water, and I'm going to add the powder to the water. I find this mix is much easier than if you do it the other way. You don't get any lumps or as many lumps. I actually found Aqua Cast itself works really nicely to mix together, so I'll be interested to see what this is like. So stirring it around, and that seems to be dissolving in really well. I'll scrape down the sides and mix this in until there are no lumps. That mixed in really nicely, so now I'm going to add some colour. I got these Eco Resin pigments from Temu. If I can find them I will link them, and I think I want a blue. I'm going to give it a bit of a shake. Sometimes if you haven't used them you need to poke a hole in the top. I think I've used this before. So I'll put a few drops in and I'm going to mix that colour in thoroughly so that I get one nice even colour. And then I'm going to add a few more drops and I'll marble that effect by swishing my stick around in a couple of times. Now I'll bring my mould in and just put my lid back on my pigment. I can start pouring. So I'm going to pour around the edges first. And I seem to have a really lovely marbling effect. I think it's better than I achieve when I use Aqua Cast, and I don't know if that has anything to do with the formula. So I'm just going to tap the mould and I will squeeze gently along the edges. Try and make sure there's no bubbles. I don't want to put my stick in there because I don't really want to stir and cause that marbling to lose its shape. I'll give it a squeeze along the edge and some tapping, and then I'll continue to fill it up. I want to work fairly quickly. If you've only got 15 minutes before this starts setting, I can see that it's already starting to get thicker. Now usually I add 5 extra grams to my mix, although this time I forgot So I'm literally going to have to scrape everything out of this pot. So just give yourself a little leeway, and when you measure your mould, add an extra 5 grams, and that way you will have enough. But this is just coming to the surface, and I will be adding a felt pad onto the bottom, so it will be fine. There we go. And last tap to settle that. You can see how thick it is, but it still settles nicely and is quite fluid. So I'm going to set this aside, and I've got something else to work on. I'm going to be using this Hellebore Christmas Rose. It's by Katy Sue Designs, and I'm going to use it with some air dry clay. I think it's usually for fondant, but I'm using some Das air dry clay. So in order to put the clay in there, I've got a little bit of corn flour, which I am brushing into the base of the mould. And I'm really going to be testing this 15 to 20 minute cure time, because I've already made a couple of the flowers and it's not going to take me very long to make the rest of them. So hopefully the pot will be ready to demold before these have a chance to dry out and crack. Otherwise, they're not going to be flexible enough for me to put them onto the side of the pot. So I've zoomed in a little bit. You can see that I am squishing the clay in with my fingers. I'm really pushing it in. I'm sort of pushing and scraping against the edge of the flower shape. This is quite a textured mould, and I want to make sure that the clay gets into all of those textures and picks them up. You need to make sure that your clay is quite pliable. If it dries out before you get a chance to use it like this, then I find if I wrap mine into a baby wipe, then it keeps it damp enough for me to use without being too wet. So I'm pushing against the edges of the shapes to make sure that it's full, and then I'm pulling back into the center to make sure that there is no overhanging clay. I can bend my mould and voila. So I'm going to carry on making these while I wait for the dish to harden, and I can feel that the top of it is actually set already, so I don't think it's going to be long. Alright, it's been about 18 minutes, just a little over 15 minutes, so I'm going to demold this. It doesn't feel warm to the touch. This dish demolds quite nicely. You just make sure that you pull both the ends off first, and that will allow you to fold. You're sort of turning the mould inside out, and then you can pull the middle out. And I am loving this marbling. I think this is more defined than I get with Aqua Cast. I've got a few little bubbles along the side, but I intend to sand those anyway because the edges are really quite sharp on this mould, and that will just take care of those. They're only micro bubbles anyway. It definitely set much quicker than Aqua Cast. So I'm ready for the next step. I don't need to wait for that to dry. I'm going to turn my mould back into the right shape. You don't leave them inside out. And I can put my flowers on the sides. So I'll bring those in, and here they are. Now I'm going to use some glue to add these to the side and build up a relief. I'm going to use Mod Podge. In pottery they call these sprigs, so that's basically what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be sticking my sprigs onto the side of my pot. I'm putting a blob of glue onto the mat, and then I'll use a silicone tool to apply it to the back of the flower. You don't want too much because it will soften the clay. It is a water-based glue. So I'm going to put it right to the edges and cover the back. And once I've done that, I can apply it to my pot. Because the clay is still mouldable, it will take on the contours of the pot. But you do want to try and get it in place first time. Any glue will show on the pot. So I've got a variety of leaves and different size flowers, and I'm just going to arrange them in a cluster along the middle of both sides. Any bits of clay that have overhung the top of your mould can just be removed with a craft knife, and then I can carry on building up my design. So I'm going to fast forward that and let you watch now what I did.
sprigs off the morning ground. The sun creeps higher, warm and round. Birds return with a soft new tune, and promise grows beneath the moon. When the spring wind...
I wanted some of the pieces to overlap and also to look like they were behind each other, behind one that I'd already put down. So here I'm just cutting a part of the leaf off, and I will butt that up against the flower that's already there so that it looks like it is growing out from behind it. Again, I'm just applying some Mod Podge to the back. This time I'm reverting back to my fingers, and then I can lay that in place and butt it right up against the flower, and I can smooth it down so that I'm trying to hide the join as much as possible. Just push it back so that it looks like it's been growing out from behind that flower.
When the spring wind blows, it clears my mind, sweeps the shadows I've left behind.
I wanted to put another leaf there, but I was liking the way that it was looking so far. I needed to make another leaf, and I realised that if I only filled part of the mould, just using a small piece of the clay, I could get the texture on that clay, but it would be a completely different shape. And I ended up with a smaller leaf of a different shape, but with still the same texture. I then had to decide where I wanted to put it, and I realised that I was pushing down and flattening the relief on the other side. So I tried to hover the pot in the air and not put it down on the table. I wanted to fit this small leaf on the point of the petal, so I cut a small wedge out of the end, and I was going to apply it in the same way that I've done with the other leaves. I'll butt this up against the petal, and then I can glue it and blend the edge. Once I had it fitted into place, I used my craft knife to push the end back so that it was slightly lower than the petal that it was butted up against. And that was the last leaf that I needed for this side. So this one's quite full and stretches almost the entire length of the side. The other side is very different. There was no way I was going to be able to duplicate them exactly, and I didn't want to. But you can see this side has become squashed because when I was concentrating on the other side, I was pressing down on the table. I haven't distorted the shapes too much. I've just removed some of the texture and flattened them. So I'm going to use my craft knife to just scratch some of that texture back in and, just basically make them not look like they're squashed. Once I've done that, I'm going to need these to dry, the clay flowers themselves and the pot. It still needs a 24-hour drying time, even if it is a very fast demoulding time. Okay, thanks to some lovely spring sunshine, you can see that these are dry and my clay has become much whiter. Now you can totally leave the pot like this if you want. It gives it a kind of Wedgwoody type vibe, but I want to add some colour to these, and I'm going to use some watercolours. So just let me remove my plastic protective film, and I'm going to just use 3 colours, some spring colours. I want a green for my leaves, and I think a pinkish colour, and then a yellow for the blossoms. I'm going to make up a really watery paint. I want these to be tints, if you like. I don't want a block colour. I want to get some kind of tonal watercolour effect, which is why I'm using watercolours. By making it quite wet as well, it is going to soak into the leaf and be absorbed rather than just sit on the surface. So literally it's just a case of painting, and that's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm going to fast forward for that. That's 3 colours that I've used to get this effect. I think it's really pretty. Because I've used the watercolours, I now need to leave this to dry again. So I'll set it aside and then I can varnish it. It's all ready to be varnished now. I've got a little bit of acrylic varnish that I've diluted very slightly. I'm using the Creole varnish. I think Polyvine is another good varnish. Eli-Chem do a hydro flow sealer. So any kind of water-based sealer would be great. That's your choice. You can wax it, but I think it might be a little difficult to wax the flowers. This is why I am applying it with a brush, so that I will be able to get into every nook and cranny. I think you can see as I'm brushing this on, it's just bringing out the colours and highlighting the patterns. You get a lovely sheen. This is a gloss sealer, and I'm going to apply multiple coats. Takes about 15-20 minutes to dry in quite a warm room, so you don't have to wait too long to apply a new coat. And I'm keeping the coats quite thin. I don't want this to end up pooling, but it will help to strengthen the bond between the clay and the pot, although that's pretty strong already. So I'm going to carry on doing this and I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. And here it is. It's had 3 coats of varnish and I absolutely love it. And what do I think of the Aqua Cast Turbo? I think I love it. This project was so fast. It took me an hour from mixing the powder to demoulding and putting these sprigs on. The rest of it was just drying time. I would highly recommend it, and Eli-Chem have given me a 15% discount for you. I'll leave that code in the description box below. Do avail yourself of it if you can. There's free shipping for UK, and I think you're going to love it as much as I do. If you did love this, please give me a thumbs up and a comment, and come back and see what I'm going to make next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.